What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Drip and Rip podcast. Hope you have some coffee. So I'm going to drink some coffee and talk about guitar. That's pretty much it. But today is a really beneficial episode because I'm going to go over this fickle thing right here. The Floyd Rose system, right? Beginner's guitarist nightmare, especially if you're like a beginner shredder. I can remember specifically getting a guitar with a Floyd Rose. Bought it E standard, right? Wanted to put it down into like drop D. I was probably just like D. And then being like tuning it down, undoing the locking system, tuning it down, and then seeing my trem just go and being like, what the hell? And so I took it to Guitar Center and paid like $50 for a guy just to basically adjust the spring claw and throw new gauge strings on there. So I want to avoid that for you guys because I'm cool. That's really it. But this system right here, Floyd Rose, started about, I think it was like 1979. And then from there, made famous by like everybody in the 80s, Van Halen, all that stuff. But once you have it figured out, it's an easy system, but learning the different dynamics and how it changes pitch and elevation, that's a struggle, right? But that's okay. So let's talk about how it works, right? So basically what this does is it gives you a trem system that you can, go bananas on your strings, and then it stays in tune. And how it does that is this one specifically is a floating system. This came off of a cheap Jackson, and it's a licensed one, and that's a whole nother conversation. Licensed versus original versus special versus, different systems, stuff like that. But basically this system works as a balance, right? It's got the strings on top that'll come and go to the headstock, and then it's got the springs on the bottom there, on that awesome looking little block there. And then from there, basically, what I want to talk about is really important things that a lot of people don't talk about. So on top, you have the strings that come off, right? Everybody says, you get thicker gauge strings, you need to screw the spring claw and stuff like that. That's great. It's true. But the small things that they don't talk about is, yes, string gauge. But what if you're going up in string gauge and the space between the neck and the strings, that can be a little bit smaller. So your action gets messed up and you get vibration, right? So with this system, not only do you have to account for the tension of the gauge of the strings, but also like the elevation of it. Because if you keep it where it was, those strings are just gonna like smack all over the neck, right? Which, if that's what you want, that's cool. But I don't like the buzz of like open notes. Anyways, so and also another thing, when you're adjusting these things and you're trying to figure out the balance, pick your string gauge, pick your tuning, and just stick with it. Stick with it. Don't think, if I'm going to tighten this much, or I want it to be this. Just pick what you want to play. So say we're going to do like 11 to 50 D standard, right? Okay, that's what we got. Because once you figure that out, once you got the strings coming off the top, then boom. All you have to do is adjust the elevation, pitch, and the springs on the bottom. That's really it. So we got our D strings in here, or we got the 11 to 50 strings. What do we do from there? We throw it in there. We get our springs, right? And then another thing about the springs, people don't tell you about the springs is that the gauge and the action of the springs actually matter. If you've got cheap stock springs in there that came from, Guitar Center, wherever you buy your guitars, probably Amazon nowadays. I think I bought a guitar off Amazon. Anyways, those cheap springs are going to have a lot of slack to them, right? So something to consider is you might need to upgrade, like get heavier gauge springs or heavier gauged, springs. So when you figure out your springs or figure out your strings, good to go, right? throw these on those little pegs, and then what's very important is the pitch of the trem or the elevation, right? And we talked about elevation because if you have thick strings, you're going to have to bring that up to take it off the neck a little bit. And then also, as we all know, with thick gauge strings or different tunings or something, you know, that'll affect the pitch of the actual trem. And now with that is just basically, if you have a pitch that's too high, you use the screws in the back cavity, to kind of bring it back down, right? And that'll affect the pitch. So now, with that being said, what's super important is to not keep readjusting your claw screws. So I've worn out claw screws on the back of one of my guitars, probably because I was taking it in and out D, C standard, E, in about the same week. So I was a cheap like Showcaster, like Squire Showcaster. But yeah. But anyways, I would adjust the living hell out of that claw with the springs or with the screws. Unscrew, screw, unscrew. Messing with the pitch of the trem, and eventually the wood just gave out and the screws just like pulled out. The springs pulled the screws out of the guitar. So guidance as to like changing the tuning of your guitar with a Floyd Rose, probably don't do it as often as you want to. And also, the more you change, depending on the tune, you're gonna have to change the strings, you're gonna have to change the springs, you're gonna have to change the elevation. And I mean, guitars, well-built ones, you know, you don't have to, even with the most well-built guitars, you're gonna have to worry about like, wear and tear, right? Revolutions and stuff like that. So, advise against that. And then also, make sure you get, I guess, research what trims are out there, right? See which ones fit on your guitar. So I've switched out many trims in different cavities of all my guitars. And this cheap licensed Floyd Rose, I swapped this one out with just an original. Or maybe, wait, this is a low profile one. So I think I swapped it out with a Floyd Rose low profile. That's what I did. So look at your cavity, look at the measurements. They're all over the internet. If you go to Floyd Rose, you want to buy a certain trem, boom, you can find all the schematics, where they fit, what they can fit in, what cuts you need to make, and then make sure it fits. And then pay attention to where the fine tuning screws are going to be, because some of the German made ones are like offset a little bit. And so they fit in your cavity a little bit funny. So, nice. Let's see. We talked about spring claw. Oh, so the spring claw itself, right? So you got your strings in there. You got your springs set, all right? And you've got your pitch. So that spring claw, those screws, what they don't talk about is those screws are like fine tuning screws for the tension of your guitar. You change those screws out, in, to adjust the actual pitch. And what that does is the adjusting of the screws makes those the springs tighter, right? Tighter or looser. And that'll affect how this thing reacts with the strings. So you got your strings on there, springs, done. You need to adjust this pitch right here, and then you'll use that with the string claw, right? And that's really it, you know. So there's tons of trims out there. You know, this licensed one, this one was actually pretty good for how long I used it and stuff like that. But the thing with license is, so many manufacturers can make a licensed Floyd Rose. So many can make one, and it's like a shot in the dark as to if one of these are good or not. I think I got lucky. I mean, you know, if you're going Floyd Rose brand, I'd probably say that the original is good to go. And the 40th anniversary one is phenomenal. But, you know, there's also like Titanium. I think there's Hartung out there. There's Schaller. All these other companies. I would check them out. Because if you have a license, what I would consider is if you have a licensed Floyd Rose, use it till it's starting to not be really good. And then from there, see that as an opportunity to start like shopping around. And when you're shopping around, like make sure you're looking at stuff that's compatible. Like on here, I'm looking at floydrose.com, right? Or the actual website here. And they show a couple things. They actually sell, the low profile, the specials, which if you're rocking a licensed Floyd Rose, I wouldn't go to a special because specials are just cheaply made. You can get a few that will work okay, but if you're gonna go that route, I would just step it up to Floyd Rose 1000 series. That's probably best of both worlds in terms of like not being too expensive, but also being good quality. The specials, I've just heard time and time again, are just garbage. So, with that being said, so different trims they got. Let's see. They have the Pro Series, original narrow, original series, lefties, 7 strings. The hot rods are cool. And so, basically, do the research because the last thing you want to do is buy an expensive trim and figure out it doesn't fit in your guitar, right? Been there, unfortunately. Ooh. Anyways, do that. Measure out now, and then actually measure out the cavities. Get in there with a ruler, measuring tape, whatever you got. Measure out the cavities because each one of these trims have like schematics and how much where it can fit, what the cavity needs to look like. So let's see. Pull this up. Yeah, and like the limited 1984 trim, if you can go on there and check that out, man, it's got the gold fine tuning. And yeah, all of these come with diagrams, routing diagrams in inches and millimeters. And go in there, and all you have to do is just make sure it fits. And then make sure the poles, these two things right here, make sure those are appropriately kind of separated. Because if you don't, that's just flat out not going to work. Other things, size, where the block is, you can kind of mitigate. I've even routed out some of the cavities in mine. And but the poles are something you can't really work around. You can't just drill new holes, right? I think you only run into that with different makers and like maybe some of the German makers and stuff like that because I'm not totally sure, but like if you're having an F-spaced or a G-spaced string assortment, I don't know if the poles change. I don't know if the trem poles change. I'm really not sure. I have to look at that. But anyways, tell me in the comments what trim you use. Let me know if you have a license and you're looking for a new one. But like I said, some licenses are okay. Some like this is actually a Jackson license, and it was all right. I mean, it did the job. At one point, I was like ravenously into Dragon Force, so I was like lifting my guitar up, like pretty sure I ripped out some of the poles, but yeah. But anyways, it lasted. It lasted until I kind of wore away the edges here, and then really needed an upgrade. So I went and bought a Floyd Rose Low Pro, put it in the Jackson, works fine. Great, and like I said, I had to route out just a few things. I think I just had to route out a space to allow for the whammy bar to go in, like all the way, or like where the whammy bar housing. But that's it for that. And then also, something to consider for sure is getting, titanium, right? We would all want titanium. Titanium's great, especially in guitars. Phenomenal, nothing you have to worry about. But a titanium trim is like $600, $800. So, I know I can't afford that. But something to consider is titanium hardware. So you can get titanium locking screws and titanium fine tuning screws for cheap, right? You can get titanium locking screws back here, these guys. You can get those for about, I want to say like 20 bucks. And then I have the ones for the double locking at the head. Got those for like 17 bucks. Those are on Amazon, FU Tone. And then you can get new heavier gauge springs from FU Tone too. And then that's some really cheap stuff you can do to kind of make this stuff better. And always consider getting a new block. This block is super tiny. Better blocks mean better sustain, which I didn't believe until I tried one. And, you know, it's funny what people will tell you, and you're like, nah, that ain't gonna happen. And it's true. I watched a video of Ryan Knight when he played for the Black Dahlia Murder. He's like, yeah, I have this Ibanez, you know, series, and one of my guys put in a block, and yeah, it actually improved the sustain quite a bit. I'm like, whatever. And then sure enough, I tried it, and huge blocks make a difference. You'll feel it though in the weight, for sure. You'll feel the weight of a new block, absolutely. But yeah, so I hope this helped. If you could do me a big favor and subscribe to the channel so I can make more of these, improve the product, all that stuff. That's really it. And tell me in the comments where you're from, where you're listening, what trims you use, and other stuff like that. And that's pretty much it for Drip and Rip today. Have a good day.